Warrant to search this property. Step aside.
Okay, then show me the warrant.
We don't have to show you anything. We're executing a lawful search.
Actually, under the Fourth Amendment, you're required to present the warrant before entry.
Lady, you're interfering with a police investigation. That's a crime.
And conducting a warrantless search is a constitutional violation. That's a law.
At precisely 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday morning in Philadelphia, 3 police officers believed they were about to carry out a standard drug raid. What they did not realize was that they had just knocked on the home of someone who had helped send 14 corrupt officers to federal prison within the last 3 years. The woman standing in that doorway was not someone who could be scared by uniforms or empty warnings. She was a person who understood authority far better than they did. She knew the law more deeply than their entire department combined, and over the next 23 minutes she was about to tear apart everything they believed about getting away with unlawful searches. Before we go any further, where are you watching from right now? Share your country or state in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, tap that button now, because this story goes completely off the rails. Jasmine Carter was not your typical 29-year-old black woman. While most people her age were still paying student debt and trying to figure out their future, Jasmine had already become one of the most feared federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. She wasn't just skilled at her work. She was infamous. As a black woman who grew up watching her father get pulled over again and again simply for being black, Jasmine had deeply personal reasons for choosing this career. She understood what it felt like to see people in power abuse their authority. She decided early on that she would become someone who could push back using the full weight of the law. Jasmine graduated from Stanford Law School with honors. She clerked for a federal appellate judge known for expertise in criminal procedure. Then she made a move most young lawyers would call career self-destruction. She rejected high-paying offers from major law firms and accepted a job at the U.S. Attorney's Office for a fraction of the money. Why? Because Jasmine didn't want to protect corporations. She wanted to put criminals behind bars. More specifically, criminals who wore badges. She joined the Public Corruption Unit, a specialized team that investigated and prosecuted government officials who abused their power. For the last 3 years, she had focused almost entirely on police misconduct, civil rights abuses, illegal searches, planted evidence, excessive force, and false testimony. The cases that made other prosecutors uncomfortable were the ones Jasmine chased aggressively. She held a conviction rate of 87%, a number almost unheard of in public corruption prosecutions. She had secured prison sentences adding up to more than 200 years for officers who believed the rules didn't apply to them. She testified before Congress on the issue of police accountability. She authored a law review article that shifted how federal courts examined qualified immunity defenses. Defense lawyers despised her. Police unions labeled her biased and anti-police. Internal affairs units both feared and respected her because when Jasmine Carter launched an investigation, people ended up behind bars. But what made Jasmine especially dangerous to corrupt cops was something else. She didn't only understand criminal and constitutional law. She understood police procedure better than many officers themselves. She spent hundreds of hours riding along with police, observing their routines, learning their methods, and understanding their culture. She reviewed thousands of police reports, body camera recordings, and arrest files. She could spot a fake warrant application instantly. She could identify Fourth Amendment violations that other prosecutors overlooked. She knew the difference between lawful policing and criminals hiding behind badges. And she focused on one specific type of case, illegal searches based on false or non-existent warrants. This was a tactic used by certain officers who wanted arrests and seizures without the trouble of proving probable cause. They either made up details in warrant applications or conducted searches without warrants and later claimed emergency circumstances that never existed. Jasmine had prosecuted 11 cases involving warrant fraud over the past 2 years. She maintained a perfect 100% conviction rate in those cases. Officers who lied on warrant paperwork ended up in federal prison when Jasmine Carter handled the prosecution. And on that Saturday morning, 3 officers from the Philadelphia Police Department's narcotics unit were about to understand exactly why. Jasmine lived in a converted warehouse located in a changing neighborhood. The area had been industrial 2 decades earlier, but now it was filling with artists, young professionals, and small businesses. Jasmine purchased the property 3 years earlier because she liked the open space and the location was close to the federal courthouse. The building contained 2 units. Jasmine lived in the upstairs loft. The lower unit was rented by a graphic designer named James Torres. James was 31, originally from Puerto Rico. He was quiet, kept to himself, paid rent on time, and stayed out of trouble. Jasmine didn't know him very well. They exchanged small talk when they crossed paths. He once helped her carry groceries upstairs. She once signed for a package on his behalf. Normal neighbor interactions. What Jasmine had no idea about was that James had a brother involved in drug dealing, not James himself. James was completely clean, but his brother Carlos had got mixed up in trouble, and Philadelphia PD's narcotics unit had been investigating Carlos for months. The officers had been watching Carlos, tracking where he went, and trying to build a case against him. During that surveillance period, they had watched Carlos stop by the building where James lived. They saw him enter and leave about 20 minutes later with a gym bag in his hands. That single moment was enough for them to decide drugs had to be stored somewhere inside that building. They didn't know which unit. They had no real proof of narcotics. All they had was an assumption based on one visit by a suspected dealer. So they did what they had done many times before. They drafted a warrant application full of stretched details and guesses written as confirmed facts. They claimed they had information from a reliable confidential informant, which they did not. They stated they had witnessed multiple suspicious visits when only one had ever occurred. They said there was supporting evidence of drug dealing at that address, even though none existed. They submitted the paperwork to a magistrate judge late Friday afternoon. As judges rushed through documents to head home for the weekend, the judge, without closely reviewing it, approved the warrant. The warrant covered the entire building, both units. This was despite the fact that officers only suspected activity in one unit and didn't even know which one it was. That Saturday morning, officers Derek Mullins, Chris Santos, and Rebecca Walsh arrived to carry out the search. Derek was the lead officer, 42 years old with 15 years on the force. Chris and Rebecca were younger and far less experienced, but they followed Derek's direction. Derek had already been investigated twice for questionable search practices. Both times, internal affairs cleared him, not because he was innocent, but because the cases were closed before anyone looked too deeply. They knocked on the main door at 7:15 a.m. Jasmine was already awake. She had gone for a run, taken a shower, and was making coffee when she heard the pounding. She walked to the door wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair still damp, her brown skin visible through the door window. Through the glass, she saw 3 people in tactical gear with police printed on their vests. She opened the door with the chain still attached. Derek Mullins saw a young black woman in casual clothes and made the first of many assumptions he would regret that morning. That's when Derek said they had a warrant and told her to step aside. Jasmine replied instantly and with precision. She demanded to see the warrant, not asked, demanded. Derek tried to use authority, telling her they didn't have to show her anything. It was a lie, and Jasmine recognized it immediately. She cited the Fourth Amendment and the requirement to present a warrant before entering a home. This wasn't legal theory from a textbook. This was settled constitutional law. Any officer who had completed basic training should have known that. Derek escalated the situation. He accused her of interfering and called it a crime. He was trying to scare her into backing down by threatening arrest. Jasmine refused to move. She called out the violation for what it was, a constitutional breach that would end in a lawsuit. Then she asked the question again. The one question Derek could not dodge without lying. That's when Derek made his critical mistake. Instead of answering, he questioned her authority. Who did she think she was? Jasmine told him exactly who she was. An assistant United States attorney whose job was prosecuting corrupt police officers. And then she told him something that should have made all 3 officers step away and call a supervisor immediately. She said that if they entered without presenting a valid warrant, federal charges would be filed against them by Monday morning. Not a threat, but a promise, backed by the full power of the United States Department of Justice. Quick question for those watching. Have you ever wondered what happens when police encounter someone who can actually prosecute them? Leave a comment below. Derek froze. He glanced at Chris and Rebecca. You could see the calculation happening in real time. Were they really going to abandon a search just because someone was pushing back? Derek pulled a folded document from his pocket. He held it up so Jasmine could see it through the narrow opening in the door. Jasmine told him to slide it underneath so she could read it properly. Derek paused, then did. Jasmine picked up the paper and read it carefully, every single line. The 3 officers waited silently in the hallway. It took her about 2 minutes. 2 minutes spent analyzing every word, every date, and every claim of probable cause listed in the warrant. When she looked up, her expression had changed. She was no longer just defending her rights. She was seeing proof of a crime. Jasmine opened the door completely. She stepped into the hallway holding the warrant and began asking questions that drained the color from Derek's face. She asked who the confidential informant was who supposedly provided information about drug activity at that address. Derek said he couldn't reveal that. Jasmine replied that was fine. She would subpoena the informant's identity in federal court, and they both knew what would happen when no CI existed. She asked about the multiple controlled buys the warrant claimed happened at that location. When were they, on what dates, at what times, and for what amounts? Derek said that information was in the case file. Jasmine said she wanted the case number so she could review the file herself. Derek gave her a number. She then asked which unit they were actually planning to search. Derek replied that it was both units. Jasmine asked why both units were included when they had no specific information tied to either one. Derek answered that the warrant covered the entire building. Jasmine pointed out that a warrant must clearly specify the exact place to be searched, and that searching an entire building when there was only suspicion about one unknown unit amounted to a general warrant, which is banned under the Fourth Amendment. Derek was sweating now, not from the temperature, but from the pressure. Jasmine asked one final question. She asked whether the magistrate judge who signed the warrant was Judge Patricia Morrison. Derek looked at the document and confirmed that, yes, it was Judge Morrison. Jasmine smiled, not a friendly smile, but the kind that signals someone is about to have a very bad day. She told the officers that she personally knew Judge Morrison. That Judge Morrison was known for being extremely careful with warrant requests and would never approve something this sloppy unless the facts had been misrepresented to her. She said she would be visiting Judge Morrison first thing Monday morning with this warrant and would be asking very direct questions about what had been presented to her. Then, Jasmine asked the question that shut everything down. She asked whether this warrant had been obtained by Detective Derek Mullins. Derek confirmed that he was Derek Mullins. Jasmine asked if he was the same Derek Mullins who had been investigated twice before by Internal Affairs for questionable search warrants. The silence that followed was heavy. Jasmine told them they had two options. They could walk away right now. She would file complaints with their department and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and an investigation would follow. Or they could attempt to execute this clearly flawed warrant, and she would personally make sure federal criminal charges were filed for deprivation of rights under color of law, a charge carrying a possible 10-year sentence. She told them to choose carefully and choose fast. Chris and Rebecca looked at Derek. Derek stared at the warrant in Jasmine's hands. Then he glanced at the door behind her, knowing that whatever might be inside was not worth federal prison. Derek made the smart decision for the first and possibly only time that morning. He told his team they were leaving. Jasmine said she would keep the original warrant as evidence. Derek tried to protest, saying they needed it back. Jasmine reminded him that as a federal prosecutor, she was seizing it as evidence of a potential federal crime. She suggested that his sergeant contact her office if there were any questions. The three officers left. Jasmine closed the door, went back inside, and made a call to her supervisor at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Then she made another call to the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force. After that, she placed a third call to Internal Affairs at the Philadelphia Police Department. By 8:00 a.m., 3 separate investigations had been opened into Derek Mullins and his warrant application. By Monday morning, Derek had been placed on administrative leave. His warrant applications from the past 2 years were under review by federal agents and prosecutors. By Wednesday, the FBI had interviewed Judge Morrison, who was furious when she learned how her trust had been abused. She gave a statement detailing what Derek had told her versus what actually appeared in the warrant application. By Friday, Derek Mullins was arrested on federal charges, 2 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law and 1 count of perjury in a warrant application, with each charge carrying a possible 10-year sentence. Chris Santos and Rebecca Walsh were not criminally charged, but both were suspended while the investigation was ongoing. In the end, they resigned before the investigation was finished. The probe did not end with Derek. Federal agents began collecting every warrant application filed by the narcotics unit over the previous 3 years. What they uncovered was a clear pattern. Inflated claims of probable cause, invented confidential informants, vague descriptions of supposed criminal activity, and broad warrants that broke the requirement for specificity. They identified 27 warrants with problems similar to the one Derek had tried to use at Jasmine's building. 27 potentially unlawful searches. 27 cases that may have involved constitutional violations. Do you believe entire police units should be held responsible when patterns like this emerge? Share your thoughts in the comments. Jasmine was assigned as the lead prosecutor on the case. She removed herself as a witness because she was personally involved in the incident, but she was still able to prosecute the larger pattern of misconduct uncovered by the investigation. Building the case took 9 months. Jasmine's team spoke with dozens of people whose homes had been searched by Derek's unit. They reviewed hundreds of warrant applications. They identified 12 other officers who had participated in the questionable warrants. The investigation grew beyond Derek Mullins alone. The entire narcotics unit came under scrutiny. The unit's supervisor, Lieutenant Thomas Brennan, was found to have approved many of the problematic warrants without proper review. He was charged as well. Derek went to trial. He argued that he acted in good faith, that he truly believed probable cause existed, and that any mistakes were unintentional. Jasmine tore apart that defense step by step. She showed the jury 12 separate warrant applications, where Derek had used nearly identical language to describe different confidential informants who supposedly did not exist. She demonstrated how Derek's warrants were almost always approved on Friday afternoons when judges were rushed and distracted. She revealed a pattern showing that targets were mostly Black and Latino residents from specific neighborhoods. She called witnesses who testified that Derek's team had entered their homes, found nothing illegal, and left without any apology. Most of those witnesses were Black and Latino residents living in areas that Derek's unit targeted far more often than others. She brought in a retired magistrate judge who explained exactly what judges rely on when approving warrants and how Derek's false statements had poisoned that process. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Derek Mullins guilty on every count. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His conviction made headlines throughout Philadelphia. The U.S. attorney held a press conference and specifically noted that the case began because one of her prosecutors had personally witnessed an attempted illegal search. Media reports identified Jasmine as that prosecutor. Within 24 hours, she received death threats from police supporters, many openly racist, aimed at her as a Black woman who dared to prosecute white officers. She also received hundreds of messages thanking her for standing up to corruption, many from Black and brown families who had experienced similar illegal searches. The investigation into the narcotics unit continued. 3 more officers were federally charged. 8 others were fired by the department. Lieutenant Brennan pleaded guilty to conspiracy to violate civil rights and was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The Philadelphia Police Department was forced to roll out major reforms. Every warrant application now had to be reviewed by a legal advisor before being submitted. All officers were required to complete a 40-hour training course on Fourth Amendment rules. Body cameras became mandatory for every search warrant execution. An independent auditor was hired to review warrant applications every quarter. The district attorney's office was required to re-examine all 27 cases where illegal warrants had been used. Charges were dropped in 19 of those cases. 5 people who had already been convicted were released after their convictions were overturned. The city faced a surge of civil rights lawsuits from people who had been illegally searched. The total settlements exceeded $18 million. The insurance company covering the police department threatened to cancel coverage unless serious changes were made. All of this happened because Jasmine Carter refused to step aside when 3 officers came to her door with a flawed warrant. Now let's look at the bigger picture. This story isn't just about one prosecutor stopping one illegal search. It's about what happens when someone with real authority challenges police who are used to never being challenged. Most people don't know their rights when officers show up with a warrant. They don't know the warrant must be shown before entry. They don't fully understand what probable cause means. They don't realize they can read the warrant closely and ask questions. They don't know how to recognize a defective warrant. Officers rely on that lack of knowledge. Not all officers, but enough to make it a systemic issue. Officers like Derek Mullins had gone away with careless, questionable, and sometimes fraudulent warrants for years because no one pushed back effectively. But Jasmine wasn't an ordinary citizen. She was a federal prosecutor who specialized in this exact type of misconduct. She knew which questions to ask. She knew what warning signs to look for. She knew how to examine a warrant application and spot falsehoods. Most importantly, she had the institutional power to act. When she said she would file federal charges, it wasn't an empty threat. It was a promise supported by the full force of the Department of Justice. This case also exposed a deep problem within police culture. Derek Mullins had been investigated twice before. Both times he was cleared, not because he was innocent, but because the system shielded him. Internal affairs investigations of police misconduct result in accountability far less often than prosecutions of civilians. Why? Because police police themselves. Because departments focus more on protecting officers than on holding them accountable. Because the culture values loyalty over integrity. It took a federal investigation led by someone outside that culture to finally hold Derek responsible. And even then, it only happened because he made the mistake of targeting someone who could fight back. Here's a question for you. Should all police misconduct investigations be handled by outside agencies instead of internal affairs? Share your opinion below. The body camera footage from Derek's team that morning later became key evidence in the case. It showed Derek's initial aggression. It showed his refusal to present the warrant. It captured the moment Jasmine identified herself as a federal prosecutor. It also captured Derek's expression when he realized he had tried to execute a questionable warrant on someone who could end his career. That footage was later shown to every officer in the Philadelphia Police Department as part of mandatory training after the scandal. It was titled Constitutional Requirements for Search Warrants, a case study. The video was designed to teach two lessons. First, know the law and follow it. Second, anyone you meet might understand their rights better than you do, and if you cut corners, it will eventually catch up to you. Jasmine continued her work at the U.S. Attorney's Office. After the Mullins case, her workload increased sharply. Victims of police misconduct now knew there was a prosecutor willing to pursue these cases aggressively. Since then, she has prosecuted 23 additional officers for different forms of corruption. Her conviction rate remains above 85%. She has expanded her focus to include excessive force cases and evidence planting. She still lives in the same warehouse loft. The downstairs unit is now rented by a teacher. Jasmine made sure her new neighbor understood exactly what had happened before and assured her nothing like that would ever happen again. James Torres, the original downstairs tenant, moved out shortly after the incident, not because of anything Jasmine did, but because he was afraid his brother's problems would follow him. Jasmine helped him end his lease early and wrote a reference letter for his next apartment. Derek Mullins is currently serving his sentence at a federal prison in Pennsylvania. He will be eligible for release in 2029. His law enforcement career is finished. His pension was lost. His reputation is ruined. Lieutenant Thomas Brennan is also serving time in federal prison. The unit he supervised was dissolved. Officers who were not charged were reassigned to other divisions. The three officers who showed up at Jasmine's door that morning made very different choices with their lives. Derek chose to continue corrupt behavior that ultimately sent him to prison. Chris Santos went on to become a private investigator. Rebecca Walsh left law enforcement completely and now works in social services. Let's address something that came up in how this case was covered. Some people argued that Jasmine should have simply allowed the officers to execute the warrant and then filed a complaint afterward. They said challenging armed police officers was dangerous and could have gone terribly wrong. Here's the reality. Jasmine had every legal right to demand to see the warrant before allowing entry. That wasn't confrontation. That was constitutional law. The Fourth Amendment specifically requires warrants to be particular, and courts have repeatedly ruled that the warrant must be shown to the person whose property is being searched. As for the danger argument, Jasmine fully understood the risk. As a black woman, she knew that encounters with police carried added danger. She had prosecuted cases where police confrontations turned violent, disproportionately against people who looked like her. She understood that asserting your rights while black can be life-threatening. But she also knew that if she, a black federal prosecutor with legal expertise and institutional power, didn't assert those rights, then ordinary black citizens had almost no chance of doing so safely. Someone with her position had a responsibility to push back. And she correctly calculated that once she identified herself as a federal prosecutor specializing in police corruption, the officers would realize that harming her would bring consequences they could not avoid. Not everyone has that protection, and that inequality is exactly what Jasmine is trying to change through her work. So what are the takeaways here? First, know your rights when it comes to search warrants. Police must show the warrant before entering. You have the right to read it carefully. You can check whether it's properly signed and dated. You can confirm it lists your address and what they are authorized to search for. Do not interfere but document everything. Second, remain calm and do not provide information voluntarily. Jasmine asked clear, focused questions. She didn't get emotional. She didn't offer extra details. She controlled the situation through knowledge and composure. Third, document everything. If a search occurs, take photos of damage, keep copies of all paperwork, write down officer names and badge numbers, and record exactly what happened while it's still fresh. Fourth, get legal help immediately. If you believe a search was unlawful, contact an attorney right away. There are strict deadlines for challenging searches and preserving evidence. Fifth, understand that accountability is possible, but only with follow-through. Jasmine didn't just stop the illegal search. She filed complaints with 3 separate agencies. She cooperated with investigators. She prosecuted the case and followed it through to the end. That's how real change happens. As of now, Derek Mullins has 7 years left on his sentence. He filed an appeal, claiming his conviction was unfair because the prosecutor had personal involvement in the incident. The appeal was denied. Jasmine Carter was promoted to senior trial attorney in the public corruption unit. She now oversees other prosecutors handling police misconduct cases. She has trained FBI agents on how to recognize warrant fraud. She regularly lectures at law schools on federal prosecution of civil rights violations. The Philadelphia Police Department still operates under a consent decree that requires outside review of warrant applications. Compliance has been inconsistent. Some officers accept the reforms, others push back against them. Audits continue to find problems, though not at the level seen during the Derek Mullins period. None of these changes would have happened if Jasmine had stepped aside that Saturday morning. None would have happened if she had allowed the illegal search to proceed and complained later. None would have happened if she hadn't known her rights and had the authority to enforce them. One prosecutor, one illegal warrant, 23 minutes at her front door, and an entire police unit was taken apart. That's the power of knowledge paired with institutional authority. That's what accountability looks like when someone with the ability to enforce it refuses to look away. That's what happens when corrupt officers finally face someone they cannot intimidate. Final question for you. What's one thing you learned from this story that you didn't know before? Share it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. This story matters because it shows how police corruption actually thrives. Not through dramatic movie-like crimes, but through everyday shortcuts and the belief that no one will resist. Through warrant applications that stretch the truth because judges are rushed. Through supervisors who approve questionable actions because challenging officers is uncomfortable. Jasmine's story proves these systems can be challenged, that corrupt officers can be prosecuted, and that entire units can be held accountable when patterns of abuse are exposed. Change is possible when someone with knowledge and authority refuses to accept the status quo. Not every illegal search is stopped. Not every corrupt officer goes to prison. Not every victim gets justice. But this one did, and that matters. The warrant application Derek Mullins submitted that Friday afternoon is now used in law schools as a textbook example of probable cause fraud. You can see where he claimed facts that didn't exist. You can see where he exaggerated suspicious behavior. You can clearly see what warrant fraud looks like. And maybe, just maybe, the next time an officer considers cutting corners on a warrant, they'll remember this case. They'll remember Derek Mullins serving 8 years in federal prison. They'll remember that the person whose door they knock on might know the law better than they do. That is Jasmine's legacy. Not just convicting one corrupt officer, but proving the system can work when people with power use it correctly. That accountability is real when someone enforces it. That rights matter when someone defends them. This is the story of how an assistant United States attorney turned an attempted illegal search into federal prison sentences and systemic reform for an entire police department. But more than that, it's a story about courage, knowledge, and the ongoing fight against corruption in law enforcement. Thanks for staying with this story until the end. If you found this eye-opening, make sure you're subscribed because I share more stories like this that need to be told. Leave a comment with your thoughts on what should happen in cases like these. See you in the next one.